Section 78 of the Book of Household Management. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Book of Household Management by Isabella Beeton. Recipes. Chapter 33, Part 1. Separation of milk and cream. If it be desired that the milk should be freed entirely from cream, it should be poured into a very shallow broad pan or dish, not more than 1½ inch deep, as cream cannot rise through a great depth of milk. In cold and wet weather, milk is not so rich as it is in summer and warm weather, and the morning's milk is always richer than the evening's. The last drawn milk of each milking, at all times and seasons, is richer than the first drawn, and on that account should be set apart for cream. Milk should be shaken as little as possible when carried from the cow to the dairy, and should be poured into the pans very gently. Persons not keeping cows may always have a little cream, provided the milk they purchase be pure and unadulterated. As soon as it comes in, it should be poured into very shallow, open pie dishes, and set by in a very cool place, and in 7 or 8 hours a nice cream should have risen to the surface. Milk is one of the most complete of all articles of food. That is to say, it contains a very large number of the elements which enter into the composition of the human body. It disagrees with fat, heavy, languid people of slow circulation, and, at first, with many people of sedentary habits and stomachs weakened by stimulants of different kinds. But, if exercise can be taken and a little patience shown, while the system accommodates itself to a new regimen, this bland and soothing article of diet is excellent for the majority of thin, nervous people, especially for those who have suffered much from emotional disturbances, or have relaxed their stomachs by too much tea or coffee taken too hot. Milk is, in fact, a nutrient and a sedative at once. Stomachs, however, have their idiosyncrasies, and it sometimes proves an unwelcome and ill-digested article of food. As milk, when good, contains a good deal of respiratory material, fat, material which must either be burnt off or derange the liver, and be rejected in other ways, it may disagree because the lungs are not sufficiently used in the open air. But it is very probable that there are really constitutions which cannot take to it, and they should not be forced. To keep milk and cream in hot weather. When the weather is very warm, and it is very difficult to prevent milk from turning sour and spoiling the cream, it should be scalded, and it will then remain good for a few hours. It must on no account be allowed to boil, or there will be a skin instead of a cream upon the milk, and the slower the process, the safer will it be. A very good plan to scald milk is to put the pan that contains it into a saucepan or wide kettle of boiling water. When the surface looks thick, the milk is sufficiently scalded, and it should then be put away in a cool place in the same vessel that it was scalded in. Cream may be kept for 24 hours. It will remain good double the time if kept in a cool place. All pans, jugs, and vessels intended for milk should be kept beautifully clean and well scalded before the milk is put in, as any negligence in this respect may cause large quantities of it to be spoiled, and milk should never be kept in vessels of zinc or copper. Milk may be preserved good in hot weather for a few hours by placing the jug which contains it in ice or very cold water, or a pinch of bicarbonate of soda may be introduced into the liquid. Milk, when of good quality, is of an opaque white color. The cream always comes to the top. The well-known milky odor is strong. It will boil without altering its appearance. In these respects, the little bladders which arise on the surface will renew themselves if broken by the spoon. To boil milk is, in fact, the simplest way of testing its quality. The commonest adulterations of milk are not of a hurtful character. It is a good deal thinned with water, and sometimes thickened with a little starch, or colored with yolk of egg, or even saffron, but these processes have nothing murderous in them. Curds and whey. Ingredients: a very small piece of rennet, 1/2 gallon of milk. Mode. Procure from the butcher's a small piece of rennet, which is the stomach of the calf, taken as soon as it is killed, scoured and well rubbed with salt, and stretched on sticks to dry. Pour some boiling water on the rennet, and let it remain for 6 hours. Then use the liquor to turn the milk. The milk should be warm and fresh from the cow. If allowed to cool, it must be heated till it is of a degree quite equal to new milk. But do not let it be too hot. About a tablespoonful, or rather more, would be sufficient to turn the above proportion of milk into curds and whey, and whilst the milk is turning, let it be kept in rather a warm place. Time. From 2 to 3 hours to turn the milk. Seasonable at any time. Devonshire cream. The milk should stand 24 hours in the winter, half that time when the weather is very warm. The milk pan is then set on a stove, and should there remain until the milk is quite hot, but it must not boil, or there will be a thick skin on the surface. When it is sufficiently done, the undulations on the surface look thick, and small rings appear. The time required for scalding cream depends on the size of the pan and the heat of the fire, but the slower it is done, the better. The pan should be placed in the dairy when the cream is sufficiently scalded, and skimmed the following day. This cream is so much esteemed that it is sent to the London markets in small square tins, and is exceedingly delicious eaten with fresh fruit. In Devonshire, butter is made from this cream, and is usually very firm. Devonshire junket. Ingredients. To every pint of new milk allow 2 dessertspoonfuls of brandy, 1 dessertspoonful of sugar, and 1 1/2 dessertspoonful of prepared rennet, thick cream, pounded cinnamon, or grated nutmeg. Mode. Make the milk blood warm, put it into a deep dish with the brandy, sugar, and rennet, stir it all together, and cover it over until it is set. Then spread some thick or clotted cream over the top, grate some nutmeg, and strew some sugar over, and the dish will be ready to serve. Time. About 2 hours to set the milk. Seasonable at any time. To keep and choose fresh butter. Fresh butter should be kept in a dark, cool place, and in as large a mass as possible. Mould as much only as is required, as the more surface is exposed, the more liability there will be to spoil, and the outside very soon becomes rancid. Fresh butter should be kept covered with white paper. For small larders, butter coolers of red brick are now very much used for keeping fresh butter in warm weather. These coolers are made with a large bell-shaped cover, into the top of which a little cold water should be poured, and in summer-time very frequently changed, and the butter must be kept covered. These coolers keep butter remarkably firm in hot weather, and are extremely convenient for those whose larder accommodation is limited. In choosing fresh butter, remember it should smell deliciously, and be of an equal colour all through. If it smells sour, it has not been sufficiently washed from the buttermilk, and if veiny and open, it has probably been worked with a staler or an inferior sort. To preserve and choose salt butter. In large families, where salt butter is purchased a tub at a time, the first thing to be done is to turn the whole of the butter out, and, with a clean knife, to scrape the outside. The tub should then be wiped with a clean cloth, and sprinkled all round with salt, the butter replaced, and the lid kept on to exclude the air. It is necessary to take these precautions, as sometimes a want of proper cleanliness in the dairymaid causes the outside of the butter to become rancid, and if the scraping be neglected, the whole mass would soon become spoiled. To choose salt butter, plunge a knife into it, and if, when drawn out, the blade smells rancid or unpleasant, the butter is bad. The layers in tubs will vary greatly, the butter being made at different times. So, to try if the whole tub be good, the cask should be unhooped, and the butter tried between the staves. It is not necessary to state that butter is extracted from cream, or from unskimmed milk, by the churn. Of course it partakes of the qualities of the milk, and winter butter is said not to be so good as spring butter. A word of caution is necessary about rancid butter. Nobody eats it on bread, but it is sometimes used in cooking, in forms in which the acidity can be more or less disguised. So much the worse. It is almost poisonous, disguise it as you may. Never, under any exigency whatever, be tempted into allowing butter, with even a soupçon of turning, to enter into the composition of any dish that appears on your table. And, in general, the more you can do without the employment of butter that has been subjected to the influence of heat, the better. The woman of modern times is not a leech, but she might often keep the leech from the door if she would give herself the trouble to invent innocent sauces. Butter molds for molding fresh butter. Butter molds, or wooden stamps for molding fresh butter, are much used, and are made in a variety of forms and shapes. In using them, let them be kept scrupulously clean, and before the butter is pressed in, the interior should be well wetted with cold water. The butter must then be pressed in, the mold opened, and the perfect shape taken out. The butter may be then dished and garnished with a wreath of parsley, if for a cheese course. If for breakfast, put it into an ornamental butter dish, with a little water at the bottom, should the weather be very warm. Curled butter. Tie a strong cloth by two of the corners to an iron hook in the wall. Make a knot with the other two ends, so that a stick might pass through. Put the butter into the cloth, twist it tightly over a dish into which the butter will fall through the knot, so forming small and pretty little strings. The butter may then be garnished with parsley, if to serve with a cheese course, or it may be sent to table plain for breakfast in an ornamental dish. Squirted butter for garnishing hams, salad, eggs, etc., is made by forming a piece of stiff paper in the shape of a cornet, and squeezing the butter in fine strings from the hole at the bottom. Scooped butter is made by dipping a teaspoon or scooper in warm water, and then scooping the butter quickly and thin. In warm weather, it would not be necessary to heat the spoon. Butter may be kept fresh for 10 or 12 days by a very simple process. Knead it well in cold water till the buttermilk is extracted. Then put it in a glazed jar, which invert in another, putting into the latter a sufficient quantity of water to exclude the air. Renew the water every day. Fairy butter. Ingredients: the yolks of 2 hard-boiled eggs, 1 tablespoon of orange flower water, 2 tablespoonfuls of pounded sugar, 1/4 pound of good fresh butter. Mode: beat the yolks of the eggs smoothly in a mortar, with the orange flower water and the sugar, until the whole is reduced to a fine paste. Add the butter and force all through an old but clean cloth, by wringing the cloth and squeezing the butter very hard. The butter will then drop on the plate in large and small pieces, according to the holes in the cloth. Plain butter may be done in the same manner, and is very quickly prepared, besides having a very good effect. Butter. White coloured butter is said not to be so good as the yellow, but the yellow colour is often artificially produced by the introduction of colouring matter into the churn. Anchovy butter. Ingredients: to every pound of butter allow 6 anchovies, 1 small bunch of parsley. Mode: wash, bone, and pound the anchovies well in a mortar. Scald the parsley, chop it, and rub through a sieve. Then pound all the ingredients together, mix well, and make the butter into pats immediately. This makes a pretty dish, if fancifully moulded, for breakfast or supper, and should be garnished with parsley. Average cost, 1s. 8d. Sufficient to make 2 dishes, with 4 pats each. Seasonable at any time. Cheese. In families where much cheese is consumed, and it is bought in large quantities, a piece from the whole cheese should be cut, the larger quantity spread with a thickly buttered sheet of white paper, and the outside occasionally wiped. To keep cheeses moist that are in daily use, when they come from table a damp cloth should be wrapped round them, and the cheese put into a pan with a cover to it, in a cool but not very dry place. To ripen cheeses and bring them forward, put them into a damp cellar, and, to check too large a production of mites, spirits may be poured into the parts affected. Pieces of cheese which are too near the rind, or too dry to put on table, may be made into Welsh rarebits, or grated down and mixed with macaroni. Cheeses may be preserved in a perfect state for years, by covering them with parchment made pliable by soaking in water, or by rubbing them over with a coating of melted fat. The cheeses selected should be free from cracks or bruises of any kind. Cheese. It is well known that some persons like cheese in a state of decay, or even alive. There is no accounting for tastes, and it may be hard to show why mould, which is vegetation, should not be eaten as well as salad, or maggots as well as eels. But, generally speaking, decomposing bodies are not wholesome eating, and the line must be drawn somewhere. Stilton cheese. Stilton cheese, or British Parmesan, as it is sometimes called, is generally preferred to all other cheeses by those whose authority few will dispute. Those made in May or June are usually served at Christmas, or, to be in prime order, should be kept from 10 to 12 months, or even longer. An artificial ripeness in Stilton cheese is sometimes produced by inserting a small piece of decayed Cheshire into an aperture at the top. From 3 weeks to a month is sufficient time to ripen the cheese. An additional flavour may also be obtained by scooping out a piece from the top, and pouring therein port, sherry, Madeira, or old ale, and letting the cheese absorb these for 2 or 3 weeks. But that cheese is the finest which is ripened without any artificial aid, is the opinion of those who are judges in these matters. In serving a Stilton cheese, the top of it should be cut off to form a lid, and a napkin or piece of white paper, with a frill at the top, pinned round. When the cheese goes from table, the lid should be replaced. Mode of serving cheese. The usual mode of serving cheese at good tables is to cut a small quantity of it into neat square pieces, and to put them into a glass cheese dish, this dish being handed round. Should the cheese crumble much, of course this method is rather wasteful, and it may then be put on the table in the piece, and the host may cut from it. When served thus, the cheese must always be carefully scraped and laid on a white doily or napkin, neatly folded. Cream cheese is often served in a cheese course, and, sometimes, grated Parmesan. The latter should be put into a covered glass dish. Rusks, cheese biscuits, pats or slices of butter, and salad, cucumber, or watercresses should always form part of a cheese course. Smoking cheeses. The Romans smoked their cheeses to give them a sharp taste. They possessed public places expressly for this use, and subject to police regulations which no one could evade. A celebrated gourmand remarked that a dinner without cheese is like a woman with one eye. Cheese sandwiches. Ingredients: slices of brown bread and butter, thin slices of cheese. Mode: cut from a nice fat Cheshire, or any good rich cheese, some slices about 1/2 inch thick, and place them between some slices of brown bread and butter, like sandwiches. Place them on a plate in the oven, and, when the bread is toasted, serve on a napkin very hot and very quickly. Time: 10 minutes in a brisk oven. Average cost: 1 1/2 pence each sandwich. Sufficient. Allow a sandwich for each person. Seasonable at any time. Cheese. One of the most important products of coagulated milk is cheese. Unfermented or cream cheese, when quite fresh, is good for subjects with whom milk does not disagree, but cheese in its commonest shape is only fit for sedentary people as an after-dinner stimulant, and in very small quantity. Bread and cheese as a meal is only fit for soldiers on march or labourers in the open air, who like it because it holds the stomach a long time. Cayenne cheeses. Ingredients: 1/2 pound of butter, 1/2 pound of flour, 1/2 pound of grated cheese, 1/3 teaspoonful of cayenne, 1/3 teaspoonful of salt. Water. Mode: rub the butter in the flour, add the grated cheese, cayenne, and salt, and mix these ingredients well together. Moisten with sufficient water to make the whole into a paste. Roll out and cut into fingers about 4 inches in length. Bake them in a moderate oven, a very light colour, and serve very hot. Time: 15 to 20 minutes. Average cost: 1s. 4d. Sufficient for 6 or 7 persons. Seasonable at any time. To make a fondue. Ingredients: 4 eggs, the weight of 2 in Parmesan or good Cheshire cheese, the weight of 2 in butter, pepper and salt to taste. Mode: separate the yolks from the whites of the eggs, beat the former in a basin, and grate the cheese or cut it into very thin flakes. Parmesan or Cheshire cheese may be used, whichever is the most convenient, although the former is considered more suitable for this dish, or an equal quantity of each may be used. Break the butter into small pieces, add it to the other ingredients, with sufficient pepper and salt to season nicely, and beat the mixture thoroughly. Well whisk the whites of the eggs, stir them lightly in, and either bake the fondue in a soufflé dish or small round cake tin. Fill the dish only half full, as the fondue should rise very much. Pin a napkin round the tin or dish, and serve very hot and very quickly. If allowed to stand after it is withdrawn from the oven, the beauty and lightness of this preparation will be entirely spoiled. Time, from 15 to 20 minutes. Average cost, 10d. Sufficient for 4 or 5 persons. Seasonable at any time. Brillat Savarin's Fondue. An excellent recipe. Ingredients: eggs, cheese, butter, pepper, and salt. Mode. Take the same number of eggs as there are guests, weigh the eggs in the shell, allow a third of their weight in Gruyère cheese, and a piece of butter 1/6 of the weight of the cheese. Break the eggs into a basin, beat them well, add the cheese, which should be grated, and the butter, which should be broken into small pieces. Stir these ingredients together with a wooden spoon. Put the mixture into a lined saucepan, place it over the fire, and stir until the substance is thick and soft. Put in a little salt, according to the age of the cheese, and a good sprinkling of pepper, and serve the fondue on a very hot silver or metal plate. Do not allow the fondue to remain on the fire after the mixture is set, as, if it boils, it will be entirely spoiled. Brillat Savarin recommends that some choice Burgundy should be handed round with this dish. We have given this recipe exactly as he recommends it to be made, but we have tried it with good Cheshire cheese, and found it answer remarkably well. Time, about 4 minutes to set the mixture. Average cost, for 4 persons, 10d. Sufficient. Allow 1 egg, with the other ingredients in proportion, for 1 person. Seasonable at any time. Macaroni, as usually served with the cheese course. 1. Ingredients: 1/2 lb. of pipe macaroni, 1/4 lb. of butter, 6 oz. of Parmesan or Cheshire cheese, pepper and salt to taste, 1 pint of milk, 2 pints of water, breadcrumbs. Mode. Put the milk and water into a saucepan with sufficient salt to flavour it. Place it on the fire, and, when it boils quickly, drop in the macaroni. Keep the water boiling until it is quite tender. Drain the macaroni, and put it into a deep dish. Have ready the grated cheese, either Parmesan or Cheshire. Sprinkle it amongst the macaroni and some of the butter cut into small pieces, reserving some of the cheese for the top layer. Season with a little pepper, and cover the top layer of cheese with some very fine breadcrumbs. Warm, without oiling, the remainder of the butter, and pour it gently over the breadcrumbs. Place the dish before a bright fire to brown the crumbs. Turn it once or twice, that it may be equally coloured, and serve very hot. The top of the macaroni may be browned with a salamander, which is even better than placing it before the fire, as the process is more expeditious, but it should never be browned in the oven, as the butter would oil, and so impart a very disagreeable flavour to the dish. In boiling the macaroni, let it be perfectly tender but firm, no part beginning to melt, and the form entirely preserved. It may be boiled in plain water, with a little salt instead of using milk, but should then have a small piece of butter mixed with it. Time, 1 1/2 to 1 3/4 hour to boil the macaroni, 5 minutes to brown it before the fire. Average cost, 1s. 6d. Sufficient for 6 or 7 persons. Seasonable at any time. Note. Ribboned macaroni may be dressed in the same manner, but does not require boiling so long a time. 2. Ingredients: 1/4 lb. of pipe or ribboned macaroni, 1/2 pint of milk, 1/2 pint of veal or beef gravy, the yolks of 2 eggs, 4 tablespoonfuls of cream, 3 oz. of grated Parmesan or Cheshire cheese, 1 oz. of butter. Mode. Wash the macaroni and boil it in the gravy and milk until quite tender, without being broken. Drain it and put it into rather a deep dish. Beat the yolks of the eggs with the cream and 2 tablespoonfuls of the liquor the macaroni was boiled in. Make this sufficiently hot to thicken, but do not allow it to boil. Pour it over the macaroni, over which sprinkle the grated cheese and the butter broken into small pieces. Brown with a salamander or before the fire, and serve. Time, 1 1/2 to 1 3/4 hour to boil the macaroni, 5 minutes to thicken the eggs and cream, 5 minutes to brown. Average cost, 1s. 2d. Sufficient for 3 or 4 persons. Seasonable at any time. 3. INGREDIENTS. 1/4 lb. of pipe macaroni, 1/2 pint of brown gravy No. 436, 6 oz. of grated Parmesan cheese. Mode. Wash the macaroni and boil it in salt and water until quite tender. Drain it, and put it into rather a deep dish. Have ready a pint of good brown gravy, pour it hot over the macaroni, and send it to table with grated Parmesan served on a separate dish. When the flavour is liked, a little pounded mace may be added to the water in which the macaroni is boiled, but this must always be sparingly added, as it will impart a very strong flavour. Time, 1 1/2 to 1 3/4 hours to boil the macaroni. Average cost, with the gravy and cheese, 1s. 3d. Sufficient for 3 or 4 persons. Seasonable at any time. Pounded cheese. Ingredients. To every pound of cheese allow 3 oz. of fresh butter. Mode. To pound cheese is an economical way of using it. If it has become dry, it is exceedingly good spread on bread, and is the best way of eating it for those whose digestion is weak. Cut up the cheese into small pieces and pound it smoothly in a mortar, adding butter in the above proportion. Press it down into a jar, cover with clarified butter, and it will keep for several days. The flavour may be very much increased by adding mixed mustard, about a teaspoonful to every pound, or cayenne, or pounded mace. Curry powder is also not infrequently mixed with it. Ramekins, to serve with the cheese course. Ingredients. 1/4 lb. of Cheshire cheese, 1/4 lb. of Parmesan cheese, 1/4 lb. of fresh butter, 4 eggs, the crumb of a small roll, pepper, salt, and pounded mace to taste. Mode. Boil the crumb of the roll in milk for 5 minutes. Strain, and put it into a mortar. Add the cheese, which should be finely scraped, the butter, the yolks of the eggs, and seasoning, and pound these ingredients well together. Whisk the whites of the eggs, mix them with the paste, and put it into small pans or saucers, which should not be more than half filled. Bake them from 10 to 12 minutes, and serve them very hot and very quickly. This batter answers equally well for macaroni after it is boiled tender. Time, 10 to 12 minutes. Average cost, 1s. 4d. Sufficient for 7 or 8 persons. Seasonable at any time. Pastry ramekins, to serve with the cheese course. Ingredients. Any piece of very good light puff paste, Cheshire, Parmesan, or Stilton cheese. Mode. The remains or odd pieces of paste left from large tarts, etc., answer for making these little dishes. Gather up the pieces of paste, roll it out evenly, and sprinkle it with grated cheese of a nice flavour. Fold the paste in 3, roll it out again, and sprinkle more cheese over. Fold the paste, roll it out, and with a paste cutter, shape it in any way that may be desired. Bake the ramekins in a brisk oven from 10 to 15 minutes. Dish them on a hot napkin, and serve quickly. The appearance of this dish may be very much improved by brushing the ramekins over with yolk of egg before they are placed in the oven. Where expense is not objected to, Parmesan is the best kind of cheese to use for making this dish. Time, 10 to 15 minutes. Average cost, with 1/2 pound of paste, 10d. Sufficient for 6 or 7 persons. Seasonable at any time. Toasted cheese, or Scotch rarebit. Ingredients. A few slices of rich cheese, toast, mustard, and pepper. Mode. Cut some nice rich sound cheese into rather thin slices. Melt it in a cheese toaster on a hot plate or over steam, and, when melted, add a small quantity of mixed mustard and a seasoning of pepper. Stir the cheese until it is completely dissolved, then brown it before the fire, or with a salamander. Fill the bottom of the cheese toaster with hot water, and serve with dry or buttered toasts, whichever may be preferred. Our engraving illustrates a cheese toaster with hot water reservoir. The cheese is melted in the upper tin, which is placed in another vessel of boiling water, so keeping the preparation beautifully hot. A small quantity of porter, or port wine is sometimes mixed with the cheese, and, if it be not very rich, a few pieces of butter may be mixed with it to great advantage. Sometimes the melted cheese is spread on the toasts, and then laid in the cheese dish at the top of the hot water. Whichever way it is served, it is highly necessary that the mixture be very hot, and very quickly sent to table, or it will be worthless. Time about 5 minutes to melt the cheese. Average cost 1 1/2 pence per slice. Sufficient. Allow a slice to each person. Seasonable at any time. Toasted cheese, or Welsh rarebit. Ingredients: slices of bread, butter, Cheshire or Gloucester cheese, mustard, and pepper. Mode. Cut the bread into slices about 1 inch in thickness. Pare off the crust, toast the bread slightly without hardening or burning it, and spread it with butter. Cut some slices, not quite so large as the bread, from a good rich fat cheese. Lay them on the toasted bread in a cheese toaster. Be careful that the cheese does not burn, and let it be equally melted. Spread over the top a little made mustard and a seasoning of pepper, and serve very hot with very hot plates. To facilitate the melting of the cheese, it may be cut into thin flakes or toasted on one side before it is laid on the bread. As it is so essential to send this dish hot to table, it is a good plan to melt the cheese in small, round, silver or metal pans, and to send these pans to table, allowing one for each guest. Slices of dry or buttered toast should always accompany them, with mustard, pepper, and salt. Time. About 5 minutes to melt the cheese. Average cost 1 1/2 pence each slice. Sufficient. Allow a slice to each person. Seasonable at any time. Note. Should the cheese be dry, a little butter mixed with it will be an improvement. Cow cheese. It is only 50 years after Aristotle, the 4th century before Christ, that butter began to be noticed as an aliment. The Greeks, in imitation of the Parthians and Scythians, who used to send it to them, had it served upon their tables, and called it at first oil of milk, and later Botulus, cow cheese. Scotch woodcock. Ingredients: a few slices of hot buttered toast. Allow 1 anchovy to each slice. For the sauce, 1/4 pint of cream, the yolks of 3 eggs. Mode. Separate the yolks from the whites of the eggs, beat the former, stir to them the cream, and bring the sauce to the boiling point, but do not allow it to boil, or it will curdle. Have ready some hot buttered toast, spread with anchovies pounded to a paste. Pour a little of the hot sauce on the top, and serve very hot and very quickly. Time. 5 minutes to make the sauce hot. Sufficient. Allow 1/2 slice to each person. Seasonable at any time. End of section 78.